What did cosmic radiation do to Ben Grimm's body? What interesting details about his transformation and new anatomy are there in the films? What are the main differences between the various versions of the character? And why did his mutation leave him with only 4 fingers? This video answers these and other fascinating questions related to Ben Grimm. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support the video with your activity. This is very important for me.
That's my seat. Sorry.
Yes, Ben Grimm would prefer to be invisible or to simply never be seen by anybody. But that's impossible, as he cannot stand aside when people need his help. The members of the Fantastic Four gained their abilities as a result of exposure to concentrated cosmic radiation, or according to other versions of their origin story, from energy from another dimension, essentially due to contact with some abnormal activity. And we may say that Ben Grimm got less lucky than the others, or rather absolutely unlucky. His mutation makes him the least socially adaptable character imaginable. People are either afraid of him or at best find him funny or clumsy. Oh, and the constant teasing from Johnny Storm makes the whole thing even worse. However, I want to note that this sort of social detachment seems to be less relevant for the new version of Ben in the upcoming The Fantastic Four First Steps.
This car?
But for now we can only judge this by the trailers. Overall, Ben Grimm's genetic mutation, which transformed him into a rock-like hero known as The Thing, isn't so bad. He's incredibly strong and durable. He embodies pure muscle and brute force for his team. But unlike his colleagues, his mutation is irreversible. But why is that? Well, in some origins, he actually gets the highest dose of radiation. One more thing, remember the unfinished 1994 Fantastic Four film that never made it to the official release? In it, Reed Richards hypothesized that Ben's mutation is a consequence of his inner desire to resolve all conflicts by brute force. In other words, what happened to Ben isn't just the result of genetic mutation, it's more of a curse, if you will. But of course, this hypothesis has nothing to do with the science fiction themes of other later films. By the way, in the '94 film, The Thing is actually portrayed quite well. They went with a classic look, focusing on the hypertrophied jaw and forehead. However, he can't boast an impressive overall body size here. His proportions are closer to those of a human. But unlike the 2005 film, here The Thing is brought to life with not just makeup, but a combination of makeup and animatronics. Interestingly, this Ben Grimm sometimes resembles more of a lizard-like creature than a rock-like one, especially when you notice the texture of skin on his neck. Now let's discuss the 2005 Fantastic Four, where much more attention was paid to the nuances of Ben Grimm's mutation and anatomy than in other films, possibly even including the upcoming The Fantastic Four First Steps. The irreversible genetic mutations of the entire team start a couple of days after their exposure to cosmic radiation and their arrival to Earth. In the scenes of Ben's transformation, we see that his heart activity skyrockets, reaching a critical level, along with all the other vital signs. But Ben Grimm doesn't die. We see how the process of abnormal keratinization of his skin starts, which can be observed on his neck. Perhaps the most interesting thing is that we witness a sudden increase in body mass index. By the end of his transformation, he reaches a BMI of around 700. This means that Ben Grimm now weighs about 2.5 tons. For a creature demonstrating such extraordinary strength and durability, this is a rather modest number actually. It's interesting that when looking at the computer visualization of Ben's transformation, we do not see any changes in his internal organs and skeleton. This seems to suggest that significant changes in Ben's body occurred only in his outer shell, but that's not entirely true. To withstand such extreme loads, his body and locomotor system must also undergo a radical transformation, and the film actually confirms this. As Reed Richards examines Ben's new body, he'll find that now his skeleton is also a rock-like structure, just like all the coverings of his internal organs. This means that Ben Grimm is now indestructible both outside and inside. And given that the internal changes in Ben's body weren't shown in that visualization, earlier scenes already hinted that changes in his body began from within. What he thought was indigestion was actually the beginning of his internal organs transformation process. Looking at what Ben Grimm has become now, one could suggest that he represents a silicon-based life form. After all, he is not just stone, he can also eat and digest inorganic objects. Whether he likes it or not is a whole other question, and the answer is no, in fact, he doesn't. And actually, since anything is possible in the cinematic comic format, Ben is now a silicon-carbon life form. His internal organs have, one way or another, retained their original physiological functions, albeit while gaining additional ones in the process. In terms of gastronomy, his preferences remained quite conventional. In the upcoming film, he seems to be the main taster for the team's cuisine.
How bad is it? You know, I used to smoke.
Ben Grimm's rocky skin is quite elastic due to the restraints of the actor's makeup. However, it's only elastic for him, meaning for his neuromuscular activity. For everyone and everything else, his skin is solid stone. And staying on the topic of Ben Grimm's skin, note that some segments of his rocky skin follow the general outline of anatomical muscle shapes. Not all of them, but anyway. We can clearly see his obliques, serratus, abs, teres major, trapezius, and especially the triceps and divided bundles of the deltoid muscles. For an ordinary person, well-defined muscles are of course the result of a low percentage of body fat and relatively thin skin. But is Ben Grimm's stone-like skin thin? Where does this level of muscle definition come from? This leads us to a crazy theory that the muscle and skin structures of this Ben Grimm merged into a single sturdy exoskeleton during mutation, becoming whole. It is admittedly rather insane, but as always, why not? This Ben Grimm cannot boast the aesthetic proportions straight from the golden age of bodybuilding, but it makes sense that to withstand extreme loads, especially in the vertical direction, his waist and abdominal muscles must be overdeveloped and powerful. Of course, I must note that the upcoming version of the Thing looks more aesthetically pleasing in this regard. The Thing from 2005 is a very dominant upper back muscle group. Moreover, these are not the features of Ben Grimm's genetic predisposition as a human. They are features of the mutation itself. Remember when Ben temporarily transferred his powers to Johnny in the sequel? Johnny also had this dominant upper back. It's as if cosmic radiation anticipated that he would need to pull things toward him more often than push things away when restructuring Ben's genetics. And let's pay attention to Ben Grimm's fingers, particularly the interphalangeal joints on his middle fingers, if we can call them middle in this case. They seem larger than those on the other fingers. This suggests that the mutation decided to fuse his middle and ring fingers into one, since the Thing's anatomy requires stronger fingers, which was achieved at the expense of their quantity. The same is true for his legs. And the irony is that Ben's large fingers are one of the main reasons for social detachment. After all, because of them, he feels helpless and clumsy in some simple daily tasks and other things. And if he had a fifth finger, who knows, maybe he would have been just a bit happier. By the way, referring to the upcoming version of Ben in the Fantastic Four First Steps one more time, he doesn't have the same problem with everyday clumsiness there, or at least not to the same extent. Judging by the trailer, the upcoming version of Ben Grimm is quite frankly superior compared to the 2005 version in all aspects discussed in this video: social adaptability, aesthetic physique, and agility. And all of that, as we understand, without compromising on strength, but again, we can only work off of the trailer for now. And of course, we should mention some interesting details about the Thing's appearance from the 2015 film.
Ben! Please, help me, Reed!
There, Ben's mutation was influenced by him being buried under rocks in another dimension, while under the influence of abnormal activity. But his main contact with rocks was after arriving at the base. He was trapped under the rubble of a building for some time. So had Ben only interacted with those rocks from another dimension, his mutation could have been completely different. It could have been less radical and possibly even reversible. This pile of construction debris became some sort of a cocoon for him, in which his new body formed. Moreover, this stone cocoon ultimately becomes part of him. In these scenes, we see how his new body is formed from this pile of stones. He can walk already, but not all of his limbs are fully developed yet. The main distinguishing feature of this version of the Thing is that his skin no longer resembles a keratinized solid structure. It looks more like a pile of stones, stuck to his body mainly in a rather chaotic and asymmetrical way. From his words, we also know that he constantly suffers from some chronic pain, almost as if this Thing's mutation did not anticipate a long-term life cycle for him. And judging by his profile, he weighs only 545 pounds and has just just one feature – stone skin, as if other parts of his body did not undergo changes, but this is certainly not the case. The birth of this thing is a chaotic and quite inventive process from the perspective of science fiction. But one way or another, Ben Grimm's story is not a story of an indestructible hero. It is a story telling us that even a stone heart can suffer from loneliness. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and support it with your activity. It means a lot to me. Bye!